Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Spincast. This is Stay Plugged In's podcast series designed and developed to help everybody get to that next level of awareness or knowledge in the esports industry. Today, we're joined by Aaron. He is the esports coach at Johnson and Wales University. So, without further ado, Aaron, introduce yourself. Tell us how you got into esports, where that passion first started, and how that brought you to become an esports coach at a premier university.
Awesome. Yes. So my name is Aaron COLEIACOMO. I work at Johnson and Wales as the esports coach. I've worked in the esports industry now for almost 12 years, which sounds like crazy to think about. First as a semi-professional amateur player for Super Smash Bros. Brawl, and then I transitioned into writing articles for Smogan and a couple of other things online for competitive Pokemon, especially in like the Generation 5s for Black and White, and then a little bit in Generation 6 for X and Y. And then in around 2013, 2014, I found my true passion with League of Legends. And I started as an analyst and a coach for a couple of different teams. I first started with Trident Esports over in Australia, where they had just been regulated from the OCE, which is the top competitive level in Australia. And so I was working with a couple of players. Pabu and Wizard are kind of like the big names that are still over there. And then I ended up working with a couple of other teams over in Turkey, in Europe, and then eventually worked with a couple of American teams where I sold software that I actually created for analytics and coaching, to kind of help with champion picks, how to do picks and bans, how to like read specific mapping positions and what like the proper rotations would be. And then in 2016, I actually started with Providence College doing their esports program and kind of starting it up. They expressed interest when I was a graduate assistant at the university. I then left Providence College, and then I was offered the position at Johnson Wales, and now here I am.
Awesome, awesome. That's a great, very wealth of background right there. A lot of different avenues you seem to have taken there, so that's awesome. As we all know, League of Legends is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, esport. So being involved with that, you get to see everything esports.
Yes.
So my first question for you would be talk about the difference between coaching at that professional level overseas in Australia and bringing the coaching same skills, same approach, but maybe you have to do things a little bit differently for collegiate students. So go into like some of the
Mhm.
differences and similarities between those two approaches.
Right. So one of like the key things, and I have to even keep reminding myself of this as I'm working, and then I always remind my students of this as well, is that they are student athletes. So they are students first and foremost. And so all of their studies usually end up coming first. There's no university out there, even right now, that puts esports above their academic studies. Your
Hmm.
academic studies when you get to college is the number one thing. Well, that usually means that they're going to be in class for, you know, maybe like anywhere between 6 to 24 hours out of a week,
Hmm.
where they're going to have this class time plus homework on top of that. So there needs to be some sort of balance between practicing and making sure that they're still keeping up with all of their grades. So even at
Yeah.
Johnson and Wales, we do have a minimum GPA requirement, similar to the NCAA. Some universities have done that. Some universities haven't necessarily done that yet. It just kind of depends on the level of the competitiveness. And then working with a bunch of different colleges there, um, and working like closely with other universities and seeing what they're doing. There's a lot of schools that are doing esports just to say that they're doing esports to kind of bring in students. And so for them, it's not necessarily about that competitive practicing time.
Hmm.
It's more or less just getting the students involved and finding some sort of activity that the students are involved in, where we are definitely focused on that competitive aspect if we think that we can be competitive within that particular game. And so just making sure it's all about that practicing time,
Hmm.
just making sure that the students are able to balance practice as well as their individual studies.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think that destination of making sure that they're defined as a student athlete is massive. It's a great step for the students because that level of competition, when you're playing at that top level collegiately, you're putting in the same time as the football players do, as the baseball players do, and they have a massive support structure beneath them to help them make sure that they study the appropriate amount of time, they practice, they recover, they sleep, and they still have time for a social interaction with their friends as well. And when you look at esports, it's the exact same thing. So I couldn't agree more there. They need all of that. So kind of touching on that support structure right there. How do you help them specifically with maintaining that balance? Maybe some problems that you think pop up a lot with those kids, and what do you typically try to address to make sure those students stay on the right path?
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of problems can definitely pop up, and then even talking about our own program with Johnson Wales, where we actually just started this past summer. We are not even a year old into this program, which is pretty incredible just to think
Mm-hmm.
like how far the program has actually come.
Mm-hmm.
But typically, I am the only person, I'm the only coach, I'm the only person who's working directly with the students. Yes, I do have, we are under athletics, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Something else that we can even touch on, but we are under athletics, so I do have the support structure of athletics that I honestly couldn't have done this job without them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still just me sometimes. So a lot of times I am taking the communication from my students. I communicate a lot through Discord. That was kind of the first thing that I wanted to make sure was done, is that we had a Discord server so that students could join. And this way here, even if they don't make the teams, or even if they don't are able to compete or anything like that, they're still able to find other students who also enjoy the same things that they'd enjoy, right? So they can find other students that play Overwatch. They can find other students who play League of Legends. Like when they first join our server, they're asked to pick a specific game, and
Mm-hmm.
that way there they get that specific role in the server. But there can be a lot of problems, especially with like clashing personalities. These are still college age students. These students are 18 to 22 years old, and so the job as the coach is to kind of facilitate some of those clashing personalities. And one of like the key things that I also wanted to make sure that when I started in the position was that I was one of the people who has access to those student grades. In other words, that way there I can monitor and see, okay, is a student falling behind in their studies? Is a student kind of struggling with those studies? And if so, then the student and I'll either reach out to them through Discord, through like texting or anything like that, or whatever method they would be most comfortable with, and we can address those issues and we can find them the support that they need. Like people don't realize how robust a lot of universities are out there. There's
Mm-hmm.
always some sort of study center. There's always some sort of help center. There's always tutoring center or anything else that you can get at those specific universities that can help you in your studies as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think all those resources definitely help those students. I do want to touch a little bit more on the athletic side of things. So that support specifically, how important is that for the students? I know I have my own personal view on it. I think it's extremely important, but explain, why it's so important, and what it helps with specifically, so we can, for other universities, other colleges out there, they can begin to
Mhm.
expand their esports scene from, what we were talking about earlier. It's just trying to get people in that play games at a collegiate level, but
Right.
they're really just playing. They're not actually competing. So how important is that support structure and that partnership with athletics to leading to that high level competition?
So if right now when you look at the college scene, it's typically in two places. It's either under athletics or it's under student activities. In the future, esports will be under athletics. So there's no reason that a university shouldn't just already put esports under athletics. Athletics has the support structure, they have the facilities at most universities, especially the D1 universities
Hmm.
for basketball, D1 for football. They have enough facilities, they have the networks and everything where they should actually just put esports under athletics. Um, and when I was looking at the job at Johnson and Wales and everything, I was offered a couple of other positions at other universities. I won't name them, but they didn't have esports under athletics. That was one of the massive, like one of the biggest sticking points for me when I took the position, was that it was already under athletics. They already saw the merit of keeping the game in that department, and therefore they continued to go with it. Now, in terms of like the importance, it's this the structure that it necessarily has. They already know what it means to have an athlete schedule. They already know what it means to have that extracurricular, that it's not only a dedication, it becomes a lifestyle at this point.
Hmm.
Where when you have a student athlete, someone who's doing football, someone who's doing soccer, they need that extra support of not only someone who's helping them stay organized, stay on their schedule, making sure that they're coming to practices ready to practice, and they're still getting their studies done, but they also are there to help with any sort of physical problems or mental problems that might occur.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. That was the importance of the structures go a long way in a holistic manner. You said from mental health, from physical health, from practice, sleep schedules, studies, all of that. It all helps. It all comes together
Mhm.
and really helps those students be able to excel in all aspects of their life. So focusing on one little aspect there, which I always like to touch on when we talk about esports, is practice. So how I kind of look at practice is typically in esports, a lot of people take this mentality like, oh, I'm just going to play more and more and more and more, and I'll get better. When we in reality, they don't focus on the quality practice. VOD review, having specific strategies, having specific nights where they're striving to improve on one specific mechanic or aspect of gameplay. So how do you go about that and approaching those kind of like quality over quantity in practice and developing that good work-life balance so they don't have to feel like they have to play 10 hours a day when in reality,
Mhm.
you can play for a little bit less with more quality and still improve even more.
Right. So I usually set a minimum requirement for my students, specifically to practice. And then when I was working with a couple professional teams, I did the same thing as well.
Mhm.
In for the professional scene, the minimum amount of practice that I told them that they needed to have was 40 hours a week. Treat it like a typical job at this
Mhm.
point. Right? It is your career. It is your job. You need to be
Mhm.
practicing. If you want to be good, you need to continue those mechanics and you need to keep them 40 hours a week. Period. No ifs, and or buts.
Mhm.
If you're going to continue doing that, then you can, but you need to end up breaking up those sessions, right? Because you're going to end up getting carpal tunnel. You're going to end up hurting yourself physically. Uh, Typically, what I recommend is after 6 hours of gameplay, you should always re-review at least one of your games. And if you can re-review a loss, that's good. And if you can review a close loss, that's even better because you're going to be able to learn as much as you can from that loss as you could from your win. And particularly for the team games, it's more important that you only focus on your perspective from that particular game, especially unless you're playing with your team, then you can focus it from your team aspect. But if you're doing solo queue games, especially for League of Legends, uh, there is nothing worse to your mentality in saying that you are blaming someone else within that game because you can't improve what that person did. One of the best advice that I ever got from a friend of mine who works in the military is he always used to tell me that you're playing against, there's 9 other robots in your game. You're
Mhm.
literally yelling at a robot. What's the point
Mhm.
of yelling at the robot? It's going to continue moving forward, doing exactly what it was doing before, and you yelling at it isn't going to change. And as soon as you kind of flip that mentality on and you look at it in that perspective, he's absolutely right. I can't change what that person did. I can't change how they were going to play or how they were going to play when they started the game. It's all about what did I do in that game. And
Mhm.
so focusing on your perspective and how you can improve and finding and pointing out every little aspect. That was one of the really big things when we were working with our jungler for League of Legends. So, for those who aren't familiar with League of Legends, there's a position called the jungler, and it's really micro intensive. So, there's a lot of really small movements that you can do that go a really long way, and they add up over the course of the game. And again, I would point them out, and he's like, "Why are you always pointing those things out?" And it's like, "Well, because I want you to get better.
Mhm.
That is how you get better. Is you look at the small incremental things, and if you keep putting away a penny a day, like that's $3 at the end of the year, and you can keep compounding that as you kind of go forward."
Mhm. Yeah, good. Yep. I think those are all really good points that you touched on there with those, micro practices that at face value from a global perspective of like, oh, I could have carried my team better. I could have got more kills or farmed more
Right.
gold or all that kind of stuff. I'm not the most familiar with League of Legends. But in reality, focus on your like what could you have done at a micro level to do
Mhm.
better? Because then when you play with your team at a competitive level, you'll be as efficient, as improved as possible so you can work together even better. So
Right.
going off the team, we talked a lot about the individual. How can an individual get better? So my next question would be, how could a team get better? So when you look at, structuring and building a team at a collegiate level, what kind of goes into building and structuring those teams? And then also, how do you practice as a team at JWU to get to that next level? What do you focus on more so than the other from that team perspective?
hmm So, one of the key aspects is definitely, especially at the collegiate level, is making sure that these students are hanging out with each other outside of the games. because this is how you're going to actually build relationships.
Mm-hmm.
My Overwatch teams, they like will either go to the dining hall together and they'll all eat their meals together.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have our practice times, and directly afterwards they'll be like, hey, let's just all grab a bite to eat. There's a lot of really great restaurants around in
Mm-hmm.
Providence, which is kind of nice. So some of them, they'll go out someplace, especially after a big win. Um, so that's kind of one of the major ways that you're going to end up building that team bonding and building
Mm-hmm.
up like that trust
Mm-hmm.
outside of the game that can then translate into the game. And so when you're actually playing the game and when you're in those practices, it's really key to make sure that you're looking at it from each person's perspective. And you also open it up that each person has a voice within that particular practice. So making sure that you're even my job as a coach isn't necessarily to tell them directly what they did wrong within that game. It's more to facilitate and begin that discussion as to what they did wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, you're looking at it from three different aspects at that point. Maybe in league, I have one person in my top laner and my jungler, and they both didn't see something necessarily, but maybe I saw it, during the game. And then after the game, we can all talk about it and we can point out the different things that we saw within that game and try and improve on them for the next time as well. So it's
Mm-hmm.
about just keeping that discussion when you are doing that video review and making sure that everyone kind of has that voice. And then finally, making sure that everyone is doing their roles. So usually I have practice drills that I give students, and I give them to my professionals as well. And I anticipate them doing it. And I usually turn it into some sort of mini competition. Who can do it the best? Who can do these
Mm-hmm.
drills? And I mean, sometimes the drills are really boring for League of Legends. A lot of time it's last hitting minions. So it's, who can reach the 100 CS mark the fastest?
Yeah.
uh, and who can do it in, like who can have a perfect CSing, who can do a perfect freeze, who can do like perfect micro movements and slants and things like that. And it's turning that into a competition. So I always have them post afterwards, post your drills. How did you do? Especially if
Mm-hmm.
you did really well in one of your drills, post that.
Yeah.
If you posted that you did something really well within a game, post that there, because your success should end up motivating your fellow student's success or your teammate's success.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot of great points hidden in there with that team camaraderie and respect and trust that you can develop just as easily outside the game as you can inside the game. And I think it's equally important in both aspects. Like you said, going and getting a bite to eat together, going out, having fun together is just as important as building that team trust. Because ultimately, when you're on that stage competing for a championship, you have to trust the person next to you, or else you're going to second guess yourself, you're going to doubt your teammates, and then that's going to snowball and spiral out of control, and ultimately that's not going to end up good for anybody. So I think I
And that
have.
actually,
Go
oh, I
ahead.
was
No,
gonna
no,
say
you're
that
good.
actually reminds me. Our junior varsity team, they started a D&D campaign together
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah.
Overwatch.
Yeah.
They're doing an Overwatch campaign. Sorry, they're doing a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
Like I love
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons, but I think that's another great way. Like it doesn't have to be a meal, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah, finding anything out there I think is really good
absolutely.
because it also takes some of that mental stress out. Because if you're
Hmm.
only interacting with your team in that competitive sense where you're trying to get better and trying to get better and trying to get better, then sometimes like you're going to get burnout, you're going to get too much stress. It's going to start
Right.
negatively affecting your mental health, and that's another thing that can quickly spiral out of control. So like, playing D&D or playing a different game or going to get by to eat, playing golf doesn't matter as long as you're still having a different interaction, but still building that trust and respect and
Right.
friendship. So I think that's a great thing right there. One last question before we have to
Yeah.
wrap things up. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Advice for high school students. So obviously, the next level for high school students is collegiate play. What advice would you have for them, and how to pursue their goals and still improve to the next level? It's a broad question. I'll leave it up however you want to answer that.
Right. So in terms of the next level, a lot of universities that are recruiting and offering scholarships are kind of offering it up to the highest possible ranks. So you do have to kind of keep that in mind. If you are in the challenger rank, the predator rank for Apex, the grandmaster top 500 ranks for Overwatch, there are universities out there that will offer you scholarship money.
Hmm.
Do your research. Look for those schools that are going to be offering you scholarships and see what you can do. We at Johnson Wales, because it's our first year, we don't offer a direct scholarship, but we do try and help with financial aid. And students can actually talk to our admissions office as well to see, what is actually out there, and we will try and work with you if you've come to me, or if they've contacted myself, and then I know that they're looking at the university. We'll do everything in our power to try and help you get there, especially if you are a largely competitive player.
Hmm.
So again, if you are good at these games, just look. That is going to be kind of one of the key aspects. Search the university that you want to go to plus esports. Find if they have a coach and reach out to them. In terms of improving your skills as you're kind of going along, look for those individual competitions that are online. A lot of places like Reddit or a lot of other forum sites will allow you to create teams and get in that competitive aspect. Again, not everyone out there who says they are a coach are a great coach,
Hmm.
but at least there you're working with what does it feel like to work with a team.
Hmm.
If you are already at a university, so instead, not necessarily high school, or you are already at a university, or if you're at a community college as well, look to see what schools out there have esports. Just do a quick search of your state plus esports, or think of the universities that are around you and look for those programs and reach out. There's a lot of coaches out there that are looking for new talent, and there are a lot of schools that are looking for new talent that a lot of talent hasn't been tapped into. Even at Johnson Wales, we have a pretty massive and diverse class of students, and that a lot of them are interested in esports, but they are English as a second language students.
Hmm.
So when we were posting posters around campus, they didn't necessarily get the memo, and they never showed up to tryouts. And
Hmm.
so this year we are making posters in multiple different languages as well to try and get the word out there. So again, it's just doing your research. Use your computer and use Google. Like,
Hmm.
just search, see what's out there. There's something out there, and it's pretty close by.
Yeah, yeah. I think when I first started getting into this, the esports scene just a year ago, from that more professional, the business side of things, the opportunities are endless. And I think
Right.
one of the best things about esports is that, especially from that professional standpoint, almost everybody's going to reach out to you. If you reach out to them, they'll reciprocate very easily. So if you have a
Yes.
question, like, and call one of us or call anybody in that collegiate world or professional world or anything, we're going to pick up the phone and be like, hey, what can I help with? And at the end of the
Hmm.
day, we don't really care necessarily if do business with us in particular or go to our college in particular. We want to help find what's
Right.
best for you, because we all know esports ain't going anywhere. Um,
No.
we all are in the same boat, and it all has that ultimate goal of growing the scene and letting it become mainstream. So
Mhm.
reach out, do your research. There's going to be something you find, and make a phone call or send an email, and there's going to be someone on the end of that line just as passionate as you are, for sure.
Right.
So that's unfortunately all the time we have for today. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. Real quick, tell us where we can find you, where we can find your esports program, if we want to learn a little bit more.
Yep. So if you just look up Johnson and Wales Athletics, I am in the Rhode Island and the Providence campus. You can always reach me by email. You can reach me again either my direct Gmail, which is theparadoxmuse@gmail.com, or you can reach me directly at Johnson and Wales. My email should be on the site, but it's a and then my last name at jwu.edu, or even just reach out to athletics@jwu.edu, and they'll point you in the right direction as well. And I would be, happy to have any like students that are interested in competing. Again, Johnson Wales, we have 14 different teams across 10 different games. So we have your typical games like Overwatch, League of Legends, Super Smash Brothers. We went undefeated in Super Smash Brothers this past season as well for a couple of different conferences. But we also have some of the smaller games. Like we even have an MTGA team. We're looking at Valorant because Valorant is kind of the
That's the
next big
next big
thing.
thing.
We have Rainbow Six right now. We have Counter Strike. We do have Hearthstone. We have Street Fighter and a Tekken team as well. So
Awesome. Yeah, you guys definitely have the all encompassing. You have a wealth of opportunities
yes,
and a wealth of games. So there's
yes,
definitely a game that for everybody out there for sure that's interested. For
that's
sure.
definitely my motto as well too.
Hmm.
Is making sure that if a student is interested in playing that game, I will make sure that we can find you some sort of competition, and you will be able to play in that game.
Awesome, awesome. Couldn't agree more myself. Everyone out there, thank you for listening. In these very unprecedented and difficult times, make sure you're taking care of your health, and stay healthy, stay happy, and stay plugged in. Thank you.